cousin Jake and I had always loved camping. We'd gone on plenty of trips throughout our early 20s, always seeking the most secluded spots to really immerse ourselves in nature. This trip, however, would be our last. Jake had chosen a remote area deep in the Pike National Forest. He'd camped there once before and assured me it was the perfect spot, far from any hiking trails or other campers. It was the middle of the week, and we liked it that way. No crowds, no interruptions, just us, the trees, and the fire. After a long hike, we finally found a clearing just big enough for our 2 tents, a campfire, and a small cooking setup. We quickly got to work setting up camp. Jake, being the more experienced outdoorsman, had his tent pitched in minutes, while I struggled with mine for nearly half an hour. By the time we finished setting up and gathered enough wood for the fire, the sun had already dipped behind the trees, casting long, eerie shadows. Jake started grilling up some burgers while we cracked open a few beers. The atmosphere was perfect. Classic rock playing from a small speaker, the crackling fire warming us against the crisp night air, the faint chirping of crickets in the background. We talked about life, reminisced about old trips, and enjoyed the peaceful solitude. That peace was short-lived. Just as we were finishing our food, we both heard it, a sharp rustling in the trees just beyond our campsite. We froze, exchanging wary glances. It could have been an animal, but something about it felt off. Then a distinct sound followed, slow, deliberate footsteps. Jake turned off the speaker, and we sat in silence, listening. The footsteps stopped, then came a low humming. Not a tune, not a melody, just a deep, unsettling hum. My stomach tightened. Jake grabbed the flashlight and aimed it toward the sound, but the beam revealed nothing, just darkness and trees. Probably some lost hiker, Jake muttered, though his voice lacked confidence. I nodded, but neither of us could shake the uneasy feeling creeping over us. We tried to resume our night, but the mood had changed. We decided to turn in early, keeping our bear spray within reach just in case. Sometime in the night, I woke up. I wasn't sure why at first. Then I heard it. Slow footsteps outside my tent. My body tensed, and my breath caught in my throat. I thought maybe it was Jake, but then I noticed something. A shadow outside my tent. A figure crouching low just beyond the thin fabric, unmoving. My heart pounded. "Jake?" I whispered. No answer. Then, in the eerie silence, the zipper of my tent started to slide down, agonizingly slow. My entire body froze. I fumbled for my bear spray, but my hands trembled too much to grip it properly. Just as the zipper reached halfway down, the footsteps suddenly retreated, swift, deliberate, disappearing into the trees. I sat there, breathless, drenched in sweat, unable to move. I waited a few moments before bolting out of my tent and rushing to Jake's. I unzipped it and shook him awake. He groggily sat up and I whispered, "Someone was at my tent." Jake, now fully alert, grabbed his knife and bear spray, stepping out of his tent with me. The fire had long died, leaving us in near total darkness. The only sound was our own breathing. Then, that humming again, closer this time. Jake whispered, "We're leaving. Now." I nodded without hesitation. We packed up what little we could in record time, ditching anything that would slow us down. The entire time, the humming continued, weaving in and out of the trees, following us. But we never saw who it belonged to. By the time we reached the car, the sky was turning a pale blue with the first signs of dawn. We threw our gear in the trunk and sped off without a second glance. Neither of us spoke for a long while. When we finally did, Jake just said, "We're never camping there again." And we never did. I don't know who or what was out there with us that night. But the thought of that shadow outside my tent, the slow unzipping, and the relentless humming still haunts me to this day. I grew up hearing my grandmother's warning. It's not the dead you should fear, but the living. But what I saw that winter changed everything I believed. After a rough year, I decided to take a break and clear my head. My uncle had left me a small, secluded cabin deep in the Washington woods near the base of a mountain. It hadn't been used in years, and with nothing tying me down, I packed my truck, grabbed my dog Jasper, and drove up. The first 2 days were peaceful. I spent my time chopping wood, drinking coffee by the fire, and taking Jasper on long walks through the snow-covered trails. The nearest cabin was about half a mile away, but it had been abandoned for years. Aside from the occasional deer, we were alone. Or so I thought. On the third night, I was woken up by Jasper growling low at the bedroom door. His ears were perked, his body stiff. Then I heard it too, the faint crunching of snow outside. Slow, deliberate steps moving around the cabin. I grabbed my flashlight and stood still, listening. The sound circled the house once, then stopped near the back door. I held my breath. My mind raced. An animal? A trespasser? Then 3 slow knocks. My heart hammered against my ribs. Who the hell would be here at this hour? Jasper was frozen, watching the door like he expected something to come through. I waited. The silence stretched. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to the window, peeking out through the frozen glass. The porch was empty. Snowflakes drifted down, untouched. No footprints. No sign of anything. I locked every door, checked every window, and forced myself to sleep. But I barely got any rest. Something about those knocks wasn't right. The next day, Jasper and I went outside. I scanned the ground for tracks, but just like the night before, there was nothing. Jasper was acting strange though. He kept sniffing the air, ears twitching like he could hear something I couldn't. That evening, I kept the fire burning and tried to push my nerves aside. But around midnight, Jasper bolted upright again, growling at the back door. My stomach dropped. The same sound. Crunch, crunch. Slow, careful footsteps circling the cabin. I gripped the fireplace poker, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then, the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate taps against the wood. I turned off the lights, crouched near the door, and waited. The fire crackled, the wind howled through the trees. Then something even worse, scraping. A long, slow drag of something sharp against the cabin wall, moving from the back door toward the bedroom window. Jasper backed away, whining. I forced myself to look. Outside, just beyond the glass, something stood there. Tall, too tall. Its limbs were stretched impossibly long, fingers tapping against the window pane. Its face, I don't even know how to describe it. Hollow, wide-eyed, its mouth twisted in a silent, impossible grin. Then it spoke. Not a sound, not a whisper, but I felt it inside my head. An invitation, a pull, a rawness so deep in my bones that I wanted to scream. I squeezed my eyes shut and clenched my fists, my grandmother's warning repeating in my mind. Not the dead, fear the living. But this wasn't the living. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up to the morning sun bleeding through the curtains. The air inside felt thick, heavy, wrong. Jasper was curled against me, trembling. I grabbed my things, threw them in the truck, and left without looking back. I haven't returned to that cabin since. I don't think I ever will. I was scrolling through Craigslist one night, looking for a cheap laptop. Nothing fancy, just something to get some work done on. After a while, I found a listing that seemed too good to be true. A nearly new MacBook Pro for only $400. The seller claimed he had no use for it anymore and just wanted to get rid of it. The guy's name was Troy, and he was quick to respond to my messages. He assured me the laptop was in perfect condition and even sent a video showing it powered on and running smoothly. He said he was selling it on a first-come, first-served basis, and that if I could meet him that night, it was mine. The only catch? He wanted to meet in a parking lot behind a strip mall just outside of town. That raised a bit of a red flag for me, but he explained that he worked late shifts at one of the stores there and could only meet after closing. It made sense, and the deal was too good to pass up. I asked my friend Chris if he wanted to come along, and after a little bribing with promises of food, he agreed. We left around 9:30 and made our way toward the strip mall. The drive was mostly uneventful, but as we got closer, the area started feeling more and more deserted. A lot of the storefronts were dark, and the parking lot was mostly empty, except for a few scattered cars. I texted Troy to let him know we were there, and he responded immediately, saying he'd be pulling up in a silver SUV any minute. Chris and I sat in my car, waiting. 5 minutes passed, then 10. No sign of him. I sent another message, and he replied, "Almost there, sorry for the wait." Something about it felt off. Chris suggested we just leave, but I told him we'd give it 5 more minutes. Then out of nowhere, a single car started rolling toward us from the far end of the lot. A silver SUV, but something about it didn't feel right. The headlights were off, and it was moving painfully slow. As it got closer, I could barely make out two figures sitting in the front seats. They weren't pulling into a parking space, just creeping toward us. Chris muttered, "Dude, let's go." I threw the car into reverse just as my phone buzzed again. A new message from Troy. "Where are you?" "I'm here." I looked up. The SUV was still creeping toward us, but now another car, a dark sedan, had pulled into the lot from the opposite direction. The two vehicles were slowly closing in, one from the front, one from behind. Chris yelled, "Go." I slammed the car into drive and floored it, swerving around the SUV and speeding toward the main road. As we tore out of the lot, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The two cars hesitated for a moment, then both turned and sped off in opposite directions. Neither of them had their headlights on. I drove straight to a well-lit gas station a few miles away, hands shaking the entire time. We sat there for a few minutes, catching our breath. Then my phone buzzed again, another message from Troy. "Why'd you leave? You were supposed to come alone." I blocked his number immediately. Chris and I sat in silence for a while before he finally said, "Yeah, you owe me food for this." We laugh about it now, but that night, we both knew just how close we had been to something bad happening. If we had waited even a minute longer, I don't know how this story would have ended. I met this girl named Olivia on a dating app. She was funny, charming, and had this effortless way of making conversations flow. We went out twice, first for drinks, then for a casual dinner. She was a little older than me, but that never felt like a big deal. My friends met her once, and while they were polite, I could tell they had mixed feelings. One of them even said she seemed a little off, but I brushed it off as nothing. A few days after our last date, Olivia invited me to a gathering. She called it a college reunion, but it wasn't organized by the school. Instead, some guy she knew was hosting it at his house. She didn't want to go alone, and I figured, why not? After all, she had met my friends, so it felt fair to return the favor. That Saturday night, I picked her up from the same spot as last time, right on the sidewalk in front of an apartment complex. She was already outside, waiting. I asked her if she wanted me to pull in so she wouldn't have to stand out there, but she said she was fine. I didn't think too much of it. When we arrived at the house, I was immediately struck by how massive it was. Gated driveway, no visible cars, and yet lights were on inside. The moment we walked in, I felt eyes on me. Everyone in the house, at least 24 people, seemed to stop talking just to glance my way. Then, like nothing happened, they went back to their conversations. A few people greeted Olivia with polite but distant hugs before turning their attention to me, firing off strange, invasive questions. Where do I live? Do I live alone? What do I do for work? How often do I travel? I answered vaguely, glancing around at the guests. They didn't seem young. Olivia told me this was a college reunion, but these people looked far past their 20s. Some looked like they could be in their late 30s or older. I whispered to her about it, but she just laughed and said, "Yeah, time hasn't been kind to some of them." I tried to go with the flow, but something about the whole atmosphere felt off. The party lacked the energy of a reunion. There was no music, no reminiscing, no excitement, just low murmurs and those piercing stares. Then it hit me. I hadn't seen the host yet. I asked Olivia about him, and she hesitated before saying, "He's probably around somewhere." I kept looking for someone who seemed like they belonged in that house, but no one stood out. I needed a break. I told Olivia I was heading to the bathroom. Really, I just wanted a moment alone to process. As I walked down the hall, I could feel eyes following me. When I reached the bathroom, I locked the door, sat on the edge of the bathtub, and took a deep breath. Then I texted my friends about how bizarre this whole thing was. Olivia texted me, "Where'd you go?" I replied, "Bathroom. Be out soon. This party is weird. I kind of want to leave." Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. I figured it was her, but when I opened it, a man stood there. He was younger than most of the guests, but still older than me. In a low voice, he said, "You need to leave. Olivia isn't who she says she is." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I asked. He leaned in slightly. "Did she tell you this was a college reunion? Look around. Do these people look like they went to college together? I turned my head slightly to glance at the guests, then back to him. He smirked like he already knew my answer. Then he added, "Trust me. Get out while you can." And with that, he walked past me and shut the door behind him. I didn't hesitate. I walked straight to the front door, trying not to draw attention. I could feel their stares burning into me as I left. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I got in my car and drove. A few minutes later, Olivia texted, "Where'd you go?" I didn't answer. I went home, immediately looked up her number online, and felt my blood run cold. The name that came up was not Olivia. The address was also different from where I had picked her up both times. I stared at my screen, heart pounding.